All right, everybody, we have our next guest speaker who was originally our first guest speaker, but due to the inclement weather that we be having haze all the time, which hazy weather is so awesome, Central Kansas is so awesome. But I'd like to introduce you all to my mentor, Dr. Bonds-Raacke, who is a leader in higher ed. So be sure to give her your full attention and respect, because I will eat you alive later if not, and maybe look good.
Thank you so much for having me here. So I thought I would start off with a little bit just about my personal journey and some of the roles that I've had in higher ed. And then I did my homework. Partially, I read one of the chapters assigned to this, not both, one of them. And then I have some notes to speak to experiences that I've had in leadership that align with some in-group, out-group stuff. But really, I think we'll have a lot of times for question and answers. So looking forward to just being able to dialogue with you guys. So a little bit about myself. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm not originally from Kansas. So I'm originally from northern Mississippi. I grew up, sometimes I just tell people Memphis, Tennessee, because it's right by Memphis, and I did go to high school and college in Memphis, and people know where that is. I was am a first generation college student, so neither of my parents went to college. My mom did start going to community college when I was in college, so that was really fun because she was working on her RN at the same time I was getting my psych degree, and it's just neat when you have like a loved one that you're sharing those experiences with. I would say that then, because I was a first-gen student, early on it was really important to both my parents for different reasons that I got my college degree. My dad sold farm equipment for a living, and he had a really hard life making a living. He ended up doing very well for himself, but he just had to work so hard to provide for the family. And my mom wanted me to get a degree for a different reason, right? She had gotten married at 17 years old. And so she's actually stayed free on her honeymoon at the hotel, because if you were a minor, you stayed for free. And so when she needed to divorce my dad in the 80s, she didn't have her own line of credit, right? She didn't have a degree to be able to get a job to provide for herself and me. And so she was really encouraging me to get a degree just to have options that she didn't have growing up or as a young professional. So again, for the various reasons, both my parents really wanted me to get a degree. I grew up after my parents divorced when I was 8. We lived in government housing. I have some of the best memories from living in government housing. I definitely was able to experience a close-knit community that helped one another. For example, my next door neighbor drove an ice cream truck, and we would get really excited if his deliveries got delayed and ice cream was melting, and so like some place would refuse shipment, then that meant we all got ice cream that night, right? Like little things like that I really treasure from my childhood, because it helped me appreciate a sense of community and really neighbors helping neighbors. On the other side, I mean, there were some definite downsides to growing up in that environment. One time our neighbors underneath us shot through the floor, and I was the only one at home at the time, and it barely missed, but it did miss. And the police had told my mom that if we wanted to have the bullet hole fixed in the floor, that she would have to press charges. And my mom didn't want to press charges, right? Because, well, oddly, it was my boyfriend. But beyond that, I think for her, it could have changed the safety of her environment if she would have decided to press charges, right? And so we lived with a bullet hole in the floor until I was 18 and moved away, and we just covered it up with a rug, right? But if you ever wanted to see your neighbors, you at least had direct access to take a look down there and see what was going on. Not that the bullet hole is that big, but as you know, it explodes. So if you haven't seen a bullet hole before, there is more room. So I share that because you can imagine growing up in that environment, I knew I wanted something different out of life. And I didn't exactly know what that was, but I know I wanted different opportunities. And even though there were things I cherished about my neighbors and family and friends, I didn't want to continue living there. So I got my undergraduate degree in psychology, wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do with it, and applied to graduate school. I ended up going to K-State. I got my doctorate in decision sciences. I'm gonna pause for a moment and talk about some personal stuff, then come back to the academic side. So I met my husband when we were in undergrad. I met him in the very first class that I took as a college student. He was a sophomore, I was a first year. He sat down in the seat beside me, and a few weeks later we started dating. We actually moved in on our first date a month after having known each other, and that was 30 years ago, so we're still together. We have 2 daughters. Our oldest daughter graduates from Providence College this spring. She's a double major, women and gender study, political science. She focuses on Middle East relations and speaks Arabic, so she's applying to graduate schools right now. She'd like to continue that. And our youngest daughter is a first year here at Fort Hays. She's majoring in psychology. So a little bit about the personal side. When I left K-State, I wanted to teach. I didn't want to do research. And how many of you are psychology majors? Okay. So when you get your Ph.D. in psychology, at least when I did at the time, there was a big push for everyone to go R1 and get research grants, and there were very few of us who would say, like, no, we want to teach or be in the classroom. And so I went to a small private institution. I taught there for 2 years in Iowa, really loved it. My husband is also in academia though, and as you can imagine, it's hard to have 2 tenure track jobs at one small institution. So we ended up moving to North Carolina, and we worked at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke for 4 years, and so that's where I was able to cross paths with Michelle. I really loved working at UNCP because our students there were just primarily first-gen students. Absolutely appreciated the opportunity to get an advanced degree, and they might not have had the academic preparation that you would have at a more elite institution, but the desire and the willingness to do what needs to be done was so evident in all the students. I just really loved that. While I was there, I served as the Associate Dean of the Honors College, and my provost at the time told me, if you want to do administrative work, you've got to be a department chair and work your way up. And that was really hard to hear because the department chair at that institution had been there for years. She's still there, she wasn't going anywhere. So I knew if I wanted to consider administrative opportunities, we would have to leave. So I applied in 2009 and was appointed to the chair position in the psych department here at Fort Hays in 2010. And so we moved the family here. I served as department chair here for 7 years. And then I applied for the dean of the graduate school position here, and I served as the dean for 2 years. So we were here 9.5 years in Hays total. I then applied for a provost position. Your provost is the chief academic officer. It's Dr. Jill Ehrensdorf. She was not in that role at the time. We were chairs together in the College of Arts and Sciences for a little while. So I knew I wanted to be a provost. I applied at a small private institution and was offered that position. So we moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin for that job. I'm going to talk more in a minute about some of the challenges that I faced in different leadership positions, but I'm just giving you the full scope of my academic career first. Don't know if any of you guys are from Green Bay or Wisconsin, but someone had said to me, a faculty member here had said when I announced I was leaving, she was like, "You're moving to the North Pole." And I didn't fully appreciate that until my first winter there, and I was like, oh shit, it is the North Pole. Like, this is miserable. It was a little too cold for my southern roots being in that environment, but I loved the work that I did. While I was there, I participated in becoming a president training program, and after 3 years of being provost, I became president of an institution, St. Martin's University. It's basically Seattle, Washington. And I served as president for a year, and in my last 6 months in that role, my father, I got a phone call. He was at the hospital. They didn't think he was going to be able to leave. So instantly went back to Mississippi to see him. He was released. He was put in hospice care, and so I spent 6 months traveling back and forth every other week to try to spend time with my dad as well as be a president of a campus. And my dad passed away in June of 2023. And I had always been someone who had no problem really with work-life balance. I felt like, I mean, I had 2 kids. I had kids while I was in graduate school. I just somehow made it all work. But when it came to taking care of my dad across the country and being a college president, I was not able to do it all. And I really wish someone would have said, like, Jen, you need to take FMLA time, right? Like, you shouldn't be trying to push through and continue to do your job. But I just kept thinking, it's my first year. I'm the first woman president they've ever had. I'm only the second lay person president they've ever had, right? Like, I can't take off time to take care of my dad. It confirms too many stereotypes. I've got to do it. So my dad passed away in June, and then in July, I realized I was not bouncing back. Employees would come to talk to me about really important issues, things I would normally care so much about. And when people were sitting in front of me wanting to talk about different issues, all I could think about was, did your dad die? Because my dad did, and I don't really care what we're talking about, right? Like, it doesn't matter to me anymore. And so I started negotiating my exit and just thought, we're gonna move back to Hayes. I just need time to regroup. I didn't even think I would go back to work. I just thought my burnout was so high and I was so depressed. So we moved back to Hayes in August of 23. It's what I needed. I needed to be around my support system. I mean, this is where we raised our children, so you can imagine all of our family friends are here. And within 8 months, I was feeling more like my old self. But it definitely took time. And so much so, I was feeling like my old self, that my oldest daughter was in London studying abroad for a semester, and she got 6 weeks off. So the entire family said, you know what, we're gonna go to Europe for a month. 6 weeks. We had so much fun. We spent a couple weeks with her in London, but then we toured all of Europe and some Mediterranean countries. And right before we left, though, I put in an application to work at the Kansas Board of Regents as an associate director. As you guys may or may not know, the Kansas Board of Regents oversees all 32 institutions within the state of Kansas, so from technical community to four-year institutions. We coordinate the community and technical colleges, but we govern the four-year institutions such as Fort Hays. So I applied for that job. I applied on like a Friday. They interviewed me on Monday, and before I even got back from the trip, I knew I would be starting at KBOR. And it was a great way for me to re-engage with higher ed. It's a remote position, so I can still work for my community of Hays, but be a part of higher ed. And when I started at KBOR, it was an associate director role, and my primary responsibility was around math pathways. So beginning in fall of 26, students will take a math pathways course that aligns with their major instead of just previously, I know it's not this way at Fort Hays right now, but previously in the state of Kansas, everyone took college algebra, but we know from math faculty and just the world that only 20% of graduates actually need college algebra to be successful in their major. So like moving forward, beginning fall 2026, across the state, all psych majors will take elementary stats instead of college algebra or contemporary math, right? So it's one thing that I was charged with working on. The other thing that I was charged with working on is completely removing prerequisite math education within the state. So if you look at our data, it's very persuasive as to why we should do that. Only 6% of students within our state finish prerequisite developmental education and the Gateway Math course within 1 year. And only 20-ish% complete it within 2 years. Kansas is not alone, right? Like nationally, we need math reform terribly. But you can imagine why this appealed to me, because as a first-generation college student, we have this one course that is causing so many obstacles to students getting their degree, and especially at our two-year institutions. So I served in that role for maybe 8 months, and then I was promoted to the Director of Academic Affairs role. So I started that role on February 3rd, so I've been in that role for a month. In my current role, I work on mainly things related to system-wide transfer, developing student learning outcomes across disciplines for courses within system-wide transfer, and I oversee our General Education Council as well as our Transfer and Articulation Council. So that's what I'm doing right now. A little bit different than being on a campus. However, I really love the opportunity to work with 32 campuses and have a chance to, when we do statewide initiatives, instead of impacting maybe 2,000 or 5,000 students at a campus, right? Now we're talking about thousands upon thousands of students that we have the opportunity to reach with our work. So I really enjoy that. Before I hop into those specific roles in faculty leadership and in-group, out-group, any questions, thoughts so far? Any other first-gen people in the audience? So I want to talk a little bit about being a faculty leader and being perceived as part of the faculty versus being perceived as an out-group member. When I was a chair here in psychology and then moved on to be a dean, I was definitely perceived as a faculty member in an administrative role. I had worked my way through the ranks. I had started out as an associate professor here. I was tenured and promoted to full professor by the body of the faculty, right? So in those 7 years, I had wonderful opportunities to get to know other faculty on campus. I was able to work with them on projects, so they knew what mattered to me as a leader. I think that I took that for granted when I was a dean because it was very easy for me to work on initiatives or get new projects done because I could call on faculty members who knew me really well and I could say, hey, here's something I think we should do, right? And there was that immediate trust that I wasn't going to suggest something that wasn't good for the students at Fort Hays. And so that allowed us to get a lot of work done in a short amount of time. When I moved on to St. Norbert College in Green Bay, that was very different. I entered that position thinking that the faculty would view me as one of them because my entire identity was a faculty member, right? It's the only job besides being a waitress that I've ever held. I've always been a faculty member. And so I perceived myself to be a faculty leader through and through. But when I went to their campus, I was the first, not even the first VPAA who was a woman. I think I was the first VP there who was a woman. And it was a Catholic institution that was sponsored by an organization of monks. So the institution in general just didn't have a history of women being in leadership roles because the monks had actually staffed the college in the very early days of the college, and lay people in the past 2 decades were just beginning to get involved, right? I don't know, maybe 3 decades, please don't trust my timeline here, but my point being, I didn't look like the typical leader, right? I saw myself as a faculty member, but the faculty had always had males from within as their leader. They had not had an external leader before, and so then all of a sudden we have different realities and we're there to work together. I started in June of 2019, and as you guys know, COVID hit in spring of 2020. And so you can imagine too, like, we don't know each other well, we're still learning to trust one another. I think trust is so key to leadership. And then all of a sudden we're faced with a national crisis that no one's ever had before, and that complicates the matter. So some things that I did that I think helped faculty continue to or see me there in a different way was, even though I was provost, and provost typically don't teach, I made the decision my second year as a provost to go back into the classroom and teach at least one course a semester. And my president really wasn't sure about it at the time because, as you guys probably know, an executive level job, I mean, I'm already working 50 to 60 hours a week, and he was like, why do you want to go back in the classroom? And I said, well, I can't expect my faculty, when COVID is at its peak, to be in the classroom because we stayed in person, we physically distanced, right? But I can't tell them that I think it's safe, but I'm not doing it, right? That's not fair. And because I had never taught at that campus, I didn't fully appreciate or understand the student body. And so I really felt like I needed to be in the classroom to know what challenges and what benefits our faculty were obtaining with our students. So I think that was really helpful, right? What's a core principle to being a faculty member is teaching, so I went back in the classroom. I also believe strongly in servant leadership, and that if you are a leader, you can't be separated from the people that you're supposed to represent and serve. I really believe in the all hands on deck, and that if there is some initiative that we're working on as an institution, that I need to be right there alongside the others who are boots on the ground, so to speak. And I just want to differentiate, I don't see that, or I don't think that has to be micromanaging, right? I'm not doing someone else's job, but I am supporting the people who are doing it, and I'm putting my presence where my priorities are, and not saying, this is really important to us, every employee must do it, and then not showing up, right? Because I think that creates hard feelings. You definitely need to be a part of the group that you're impacting as a leader. So I think those were two things that really helped in terms of building my relationship with my faculty colleagues who didn't know me. The other thing that I think was so key to my success at that time was I had women of color leaders at St. Norbert who reached out to me. They saw that I was struggling. They saw that I was in an environment of all males who weren't accepting of a woman leader, and they offered to help support me, right, to serve as a sounding board, to help share institutional knowledge of things that had been effective or things that had not worked in the past, so that I was more prepared and knowledgeable for the environment or attitude of opposition that I might face, right? So I was really grateful for those women who stepped up and said, we're here as a resource if you ever want to use us, and they are my best friends as of today, right? Because I think when you live through something with someone, difficult times, you develop a bond, and I grew to respect them even more because I learned about their personal journeys, right, and how they had overcome obstacles in their professional careers. When I left St. Norbert, and I don't mean to paint the picture that it was very negative, because we accomplished quite a bit, and I can talk more if you're interested about how we linked our senior diversity officer position with the dean of curriculum. I mean, we were very intentional about having some deliberate changes to the curricular experience for our students. I then went to St. Martin's, right, as president. St. Martin's had never had a woman president either. It was also a Catholic institution that was founded by the monks, and we were governed by the monks that lived there on campus. I was the second lay president there. So in terms of that, I had seen that landscape before, right? I kind of knew what challenges I might face in terms of not being a part of, I'm not a man, and I'm not a member of the monastic community. So thinking back to your readings about in-group, out-group, I knew I wasn't a part of that group. However, the faculty there were so excited to have someone with an academic background to be a president that I had a very different experience than what I had as provost. I had something exactly like I experienced here at Fort Hays in terms of when I was a dean. And I had faculty who wanted to work together to really change things for the better at St. Martin's. What was really exciting about the work that we were able to do in a short amount of time at St. Martin's, it was a majority minority institution. Also, the majority of our students were first-gen students. We wanted to do some things right away to change the number of years it took to graduate. So I don't know if you've looked at Fort Hays's or the state's four-year retention rate, or I'm sorry, four-year graduation rate. It's not good. Even the six-year graduation rate is not good. We can do better. And similarly at St. Martin's, we can do better. We also did not have a good first to second year retention rate. We improved it by 12% in 1 year, but there's no way we could have done that without the faculty and the administration working together. We also did things like research consistently shows that after your first year of college, if you have not completed 30 credit hours, you are significantly less likely to graduate on time. So we did a summer of promise where we reached out to all our first year students who didn't have 30 hours and said, we will give you those hours for free this summer if you enroll in these courses. You can do them virtually. We created communities of practice because we took the mindset of, we have failed you as an institution. We promised that if you came here, we would be invested in your success. And if we haven't done everything in our ability to make sure you have 30 credit hours by the end of your first year, that's on us, and we're gonna get you caught up. And that was very successful. But again, to have those structural sorts of changes, you have to have trust in all parties that are working on the change, right? And because I trusted the faculty and they trusted me, we were able to do those kinds of projects. So I wanted to mention that. Your book also talked about creativity, or the chapter that I read, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's like if it was an article or a book, but I wanted to mention that because I think creativity and leadership is so interesting. And by all accounts, I always consider myself not a creative person. I don't cook, I'm not artsy, I don't draw, I can't sew, my talent lies in higher ed, and I feel really good about that. But I have learned that one of the things that I think I do really well as a leader is by having expertise in higher ed, I can be creative in problem solving. And I thought that this chapter did a really interesting job about highlighting, if you are part of the in-group, you can be creative in solving problems and people accept that. But if you're not part of the group and you bring creativity, or if you don't have the expertise to implement the creativity, it can be reckless, not your textbooks, but reckless and dangerous, right? Even I would say. So that I think there's such a link between in-group expertise and leadership. So if you have any questions about that, we can certainly circle back to that. Oh, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about, because the article talked about this too, is authenticity. I'm a huge proponent of authenticity, although I will say lately, I don't love the way the conversation is going with authenticity, because I think being true to who you are as a leader is key, and I love that definition of authenticity. And 5 years ago, I would have even agreed with the article that I read where it says, an authentic leader tells it like it is. Very true, love that. However, I think an authentic leader also has to be respectful of all the people in their community. And being authentic does not give you permission to be rude or dismissive of the people that you serve in your leadership role. So I think there's a combination there of telling it like it is, being authentic, but truly valuing and respecting all people that are your stakeholders. And it feels like sometimes in the literature that there's been this focus on telling it like it is and really valuing that, and letting go of the other half that I think is equally important to authenticity and leadership. Those are my prepared comments. I would love for questions or any wisdom I can share, or anything I really fucked up that you can learn from. I want you to have that opportunity.
Yeah, everyone's prepared questions, and if
All right.
anything that y'all want to ask, then
Yeah.
go ahead.
And can you tell me your name?
Maya.
Okay, Maya.
So it sounds like, yeah, you moved to a lot of different districts and different colleges and assisted there. Did you have to tweak your leadership styles throughout those? Did they ask for different things, or were you able to kind of stay true to how you operated?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's not a this or that, but an and situation, right? So I think in many ways I could stay true to core values. The way that I approach higher ed, I definitely feel like higher ed was created for faculty and staff. We did not create higher ed for students. And if you look back on the development of higher ed, that's not an opinion, it's just how the institution was developed. And so as a first gen student, I find that we have these hoops, right? And a lot of obstacles that we expect students to be able to navigate, and we don't help them. I don't know about you guys, but when I started, I didn't know what a bursar's office was, right? And no one was saying, when you go to the bursar's office, that's the person you pay your bill, right? Nobody was giving me that definition. So there's so many ways that we gatekeep students in higher ed. I was always able to remain true to that. where I would say as a leader, I really pushed myself not to say, remain true and don't change, but I tried to think about what can I learn from the campus and the people around me that will help me be better at meeting the needs of the students on this campus, right? And so I think some things that I got a higher level of sophistication in along the way was messaging, to not be reactive, but to be proactive, to not be afraid to jump in and take conversations and questions with people, right? Because if you're serving a community and they have concerns, those should be your concerns, right? So I think it's both. But in all honesty, it can feel when you're in these roles very isolating, and you can feel like you're being attacked. And if it wasn't for my mentors to help me think about, like, well, one, who cares if they're attacking you, but what is the message in there that can help you be a better servant leader, right? And so, kind of learning how to not take things personal and focus on the growth mindset, I think has really been key for me. Any follow-up to that, or did I answer it okay? Okay, all right. Yay.
I'll go.
Okay.
So with
And your name?
Lily.
Lily, okay.
With your remote position, do you feel like it's difficult to like explore your leadership styles, or do you think it's like pretty much the same as like your in-person positions?
Oh yeah, great question. So, I mean, two things I would mention if we're comparing remote to in-person type leadership. One is when I've had in-person roles, they have always been at a single campus. And right now I work with 32 vice presidents of academic affairs, right? So I would never be able to be on a single campus. So in that regard, I think the remote nature of my job helps me to feel more connected with all of the vice presidents instead of just those that I happen to be with locally. The other reason that I think it's helpful is because sometimes it can feel within the state, or it did when I was a faculty member here, acknowledging maybe things have changed in a decade, that everything feels very Topeka-centric, right? Everything happens in Topeka, our larger R1s are on the east side of the state, and it's like, hey, there's great things going on in western Kansas, and we have a lot of community, technical, and Fort Hays out in western Kansas, right? So by myself and others being stationed across the state, I think it allows us more frequent on-campus interaction with all of our institutions, and not just saying, well, if you drive to Topeka, we'll be able to see you in person. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I think no matter what the role is, if you're primarily relying on a mediated form of communication, you do have to take the extra steps to get to know people, right? And so I do little things that some people might think is a waste of time as a leader, but at the beginning of every semester, I send personal emails to the faculty and staff that I work with on campus, right? Just saying, like, as the semester starts, I'm thinking about you. If I know they're working on a certain project, I'll mention that. I'll ask them to keep me posted on it, right? I try to follow or connect with all of the people that I work with on LinkedIn. And so if I have a vice president who is sharing great news about a student on their campus, I comment on it, I share it with my network, right? So I do think that you have to be intentional, and you can't just say, well, people will email me if they need me, right? But going that extra mile, not necessarily different than what you would do in person, but you just have to do it in a different way.
That was good.
Okay, yeah.
My name's Kirsten, and I was wondering, like, if you had to name off, like, what leadership abilities and traits that you possess, like, what has helped you be the most successful in your higher education experience?
One, I would say, and although this might not be a trait, it's certainly environmental, but I think that my family keeps me very humble, right? So I mentioned I have very rural roots, and I'm the first person in my family to be a doctor. And my nickname growing up was Tootie, and so my family calls me Dr. Tootie. And when I get Christmas cards in the mail, it's to Dr. Tootie. They're very respectful, please don't get me wrong, but they constantly remind me of where I am, and that if I am in a role where I'm supposed to be helping students, I better be helping them or they're going to call me on the carpet, right? Like, so I think that remembering your purpose and being humble is super key. Again, maybe not a trait, maybe an environment situation, but I do appreciate that I have that. I have always enjoyed thinking in intentional ways about how best to communicate in writing and verbally. And so I definitely think that a key part of being a leader, or at least being a successful leader, or not having a lot of drama in my leadership, is that I embrace constant and two-way communication. And that I definitely think has served me well over the years. I wasn't always necessarily a strong writer, but when I went to graduate school, they really worked with me on that. Let's talk briefly about verbal communication. On this one, you guys might feel like I've sold out a little bit, and it's okay, I have to reckon with that in my own way, but when I went to K-State for grad school, one of my advisors said, if you ever want to go anywhere in higher ed, you're going to have to change the way you talk. So you can imagine, I moved, I was a 21-year-old who had only lived in Mississippi. If you think I have an accent now, you should have heard me then. I had a very strong accent. I would say things like, when I went to the grocery store, what is it that you guys push around?
A cart?
Yeah, what do I push?
A buggy.
I push a buggy, right?
Oh.
Like, there was a lot of colloquial phrases that I would use, right? And that was certainly fine in Mississippi, and in many instances people would know what I meant, but when I left that region, sometimes the dialect that I was using wasn't always as effective, right? Or it made me appear uneducated. And you could say, hey, that's on the people who are making those assumptions. And I would like to believe that is true about the world, but I did notice that when I made changes to speech or grammar, etc., that I faced less resistance. And I definitely felt like, as a woman leader already, I had enough obstacles to overcome. And so I remember for a while I even stopped saying y'all, because I was the only one in Kansas at the time to say y'all, right? Like, really loving that we can all say y'all now, and that it's meant to be inclusive. But I remember switching to you guys intentionally, and it was so awkward for me. And then I couldn't ever get the plural of you guys, or possessive of you guys, correct. I wanted to go back to y'all so badly. But so again, I don't know how time judges me or how you perceive that. Did I sell out in that? But I definitely felt the pressure, and in some ways have more mainstreamed my communication, for better or worse. That being said, I definitely think really hard, and I try to challenge psychology departments when we teach, like the science of psych class, when we teach writing and psychology, when we teach APA style. These are social constructs of what we have determined is correct grammar, right? And so in what ways are we gatekeeping or not allowing other voices to be published or other ideas to be expressed by imposing upon the field different restrictions in the way that we write? So I don't know, I'm trying to make up for where I feel like I've given it a little bit. There was one other thing I wanted to say. Can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, what leadership abilities or traits do you think you possess that have helped you be the most successful in your higher education experience?
I'll do a quick shout out to my husband, not a trait, an environmental situation. My husband has always been so supportive of my career, and he is was the primary caregiver of our children when they were growing up, and it was because of that environment that I was always able to, I don't want to say put my career first, but I never had to worry about if I had a sick kid who was staying at home with the child, right? My husband automatically did that, and so it allowed me to really focus on my career aspirations and be able to achieve those. No follow-up? All good? All right. Has anyone else faced a similar situation where, going back to my speech, like you felt the need to assimilate or be more professional, whatever that definition might be?
Honestly, I think in like more normal day-to-day interactions, the way you talk with just casual friends versus like someone part of like a group that you're in, like extracurricular activity, part of campus, whatever, like when you're talking to those leaders, the way you talk to them is gonna be so much different than the way you talk to your friends.
Right.
So I think in that sense, it's a bit of a shift.
Yeah.
Because like, if you like saying funny words, you know that you can do that okay with friends and things like that.
Right.
But then if you're talking to more older people with higher education or important roles, you're like, okay, I want to be taken serious, so I'm gonna tweak my dialect.
Yeah.
I think that's also true in like emailing and texting too. It's like I often recognize that like if I'm texting like someone I work for, I use punctuation, but if I'm texting a friend, I like text one thought and then I text another thought and then I text another thought.
Yeah.
Which like we do that back and forth, but it's
Right.
still like I'm not gonna do that to a boss.
And generational too, right? So like I tend to always use punctuation, but then one of my daughters will say like, why is there a period? Are you mad at me? And I'm like, no, it's the end of the sentence, right? Like that's why there's a period. I'm not mad. Like I'm getting mad now, but I'm not mad when I wrote that sentence. It was just,
She stresses me out.
it's just the end. Now, see, now I like in the classroom, and don't be upset, I like Gen Z better than I did millennials.
I would say, they engage through a lot of stuff. We got about 8 more minutes. We have another question that's like would be really great for the good of the group to get out there.
Did you participate like any like clubs during your like academic journey that helped you in your leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought intentionally about that, but certainly, right? I was in Psych Club, I was in Psych High, I was president of Psych Club and then president of Psych High, and all of those opportunities, right? To work more closely with faculty members or hear from my peers things that they wanted to accomplish during the year and then be able to set a strategic plan, even if I didn't know what that was, to accomplish that within the year. Yeah, those are great opportunities. And I would say I kind of took I was like, take this as a good and bad thing, but I also really never said no to opportunities, right? If an opportunity came along, I was like, great, let's do it. And so I know that contributes to burnout. I know that you guys as a generation, I think, are much better about setting those boundaries. Obviously, that really bit me in the ass in terms of my professional career, right? Where I didn't set boundaries, and I should have. At the same time, some of the best opportunities came because I didn't say no, and I was willing to try things that maybe I didn't personally feel like I was prepared for, but others around me thought I was ready for. So, were you gonna ask a question?
Yes, my name's Annalise, and I was wondering if there was one thing you could change about how you went about your undergrad and your master's and just everything about college. What would you do differently?
I don't know. I'm pretty pleased with the way that turned out. Let me kind of I don't have anything for you. And I'm kind of thinking about, like, I have no regrets. There are certain things that maybe I wish I would have done a little bit differently or whatever, but I don't know. It all worked out in the end. And
Maybe like a piece of advice from back whenever you were in college?
oh, absolutely. Okay, thank you for rephrasing it to save me here. And it's not that I did everything perfect. I'm just comfortable with mistakes that I made and see it as a part of my journey, right? Like, I'm okay with that. Definitely pieces of advice. Build your sense of community wherever you are. I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to have not only your professional support system, but your personal support system. I think networking for any field, but especially psychology, is so key to what you guys do. And so you're hanging out and taking classes and have friendships with people that, believe it or not, you'll be in the field with 10, 20 years later, right? And so maintaining those connections or really leaning into it and realizing how you're going to support one another throughout your professional career.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Hey, my name is Minaj. Question I have is, given your passion for supporting first generation and non-traditional students, what do you believe are the biggest barriers these students face, and how can institutions better support their success?
Yeah. So I've mentioned this before, right? Like, we know institutions weren't designed for students. And I think that we have so many barriers and gates and obstacles put up for first-gen students that we as institutions don't always even know exist, because we haven't always taken the time to ask, is your path straightforward, right? So within the state of Kansas, for example, we just required this past year across all of our institutions that every major has to have a degree map. It's crazy to me, if you think about it, that until 2024, institutions within Kansas did not have to show students what was required for their major and how they would get there in 4 years, right? Yeah, so I think like that's a really great example of when you're in an organization and that's all you've ever been in, it's so clear to you what you need to do, but it is not clear to our students who are coming in, right? So I think that that is key, and that as leaders we have to do a better job of making sure we're in touch with the needs of our students. And then the other part of that, non-traditional students, as you guys know, our rate of students going to college within the state of Kansas continues to go down. I think we're at 48% now of high school students who graduate within 4 years from a Kansas institution go on to one of our 32 institutions. Now that doesn't mean some don't go off to a different state, but it's still concerning that we're down to less than half of our high school graduates go on to pursue any degree, not just a 4-year degree. And so as institutions are thinking about what are we going to do with that demographic cliff that you guys have probably heard a lot about, we are realizing that there's other individuals within the state, adults, veterans, right, who haven't had access to higher ed, and we really need to think about how do we make it fit into their lives instead of the other way around, right? Because we are thousands of jobs short within the state. We don't have enough people who have the credentials that we need to hold the vacant jobs, and the disparity is only going to continue to grow within the next 10 years. So in terms of workforce development, we've really got to think about who are the citizens in our state and how are we going to get them access to the degrees that they need to be able to serve us, right?
Well, thank you all so much for being here and engaging us and bringing it at the end. If there are questions that you want to further follow up with, I would say I can also forward those,
Please.
over, and possibly there might be the opportunity for some sort of other